Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is eclipse. Let's take a moment and look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear this verb used, especially during the first week of April here in North America, means to obscure the light from or to another celestial body. So this is really talking about planets or moons, many times that are blocking the light from another planet or have it from it reaching another planet. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the video later, especially as we discuss the noun form of this word. Now, related to the first definition, the second way you might hear this verb used can just mean to obscure, which you might think of sort of like hiding something, making something not able to be seen, or it could mean to darken, right? So sort of connected to that idea of blocking some light. I've seen this verb used in storytelling, where someone is kind of trying to paint a picture that something is being obscured from another person's sight. A third way the verb eclipse gets used can mean to surpass or to outshine. Many times I've heard this used in connection to athletes and their performance or the team's performance, noting that they are surpassing certain accomplishments or maybe even certain records. I've got an example of that in just a moment as well. A fourth way to use the verb eclipse can mean to diminish, which is kind of reduce, in significance, prominence, or power. So again, we'll talk a little bit about that just a little later. Now, what we should all remember or know is that eclipse is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end and then add ing. That forms eclipsing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Now, our base verb, when we say it, eclipse, ends with this unvoiced S sound. This means the ed ending is going to make a T sound. So it should sound like this. Eclipsed, eclipsed. Okay? And I forgot to mention, maybe you've noticed the picture on the bottom of my screen. This is an example of the moon eclipsing the sun. So it's blocking or obscuring the light. Now, we should mention really quickly, there are no phrasal verbs that we need to study or discuss today. So instead, we can move on and talk a little bit more about our verb of the day and use it in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the simple past tense and the present perfect. Let's start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about completed actions at a known point in the past. Okay? The nice thing about making sentences in the simple past tense is that our structure or the pattern of making a sentence, it stays the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, we're going to have our subject, and then we're going to have that ed form of our verb. Now, I mentioned on April 8th, which is when this video is going to be posted on YouTube, on April 8th, there is an eclipse occurring over North America. So people in Mexico, the United States, and Canada will be able to see the first definition that we've been talking about. So if you're watching this later, you might think of an example of that occurring kind of just in the past. There's our known time. So an example of that might be the moon just eclipsed the last piece of the sun, right? Kind of totally blocking it. Now, if you want to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, Your pattern here is to start with your subject, use did not or the contraction didn't, and then the base verb. Let's take a look at an example. They didn't eclipse any records last season. Okay, so here, maybe we're talking about a certain sports team, and we're going to that meaning of surpassing, right? So they didn't break a record, or they didn't set a record. Many different ways we can talk about outshining or really outdoing another's performance. Now let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, we start with did, then we have our subject, and then the base verb. I always like to remind students, notice the only time I'm using the ed form of the verb is in the affirmative, right? Not in the negative and not with my yes or no questions. Here's my last simple past tense example. Did clouds and showers eclipse the blue sky? Okay, so here we might be going to that second definition where we talked about obscuring or maybe darkening, right? So maybe it's a really pretty day. You see this lovely blue sky, but then all of a sudden, right, clouds roll in, maybe it starts to rain, and it sort of obscures or darkens the sky. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the present perfect. We can use this verb tense in a couple different ways. We can do it to describe an action that started in the past and continues into the present. We can also use it to describe completed actions. But when we're talking about completed actions here, what makes it a little different from the simple past tense is that we don't know when. We say this is the indefinite past tense. Okay, so maybe that completed action occurred last week, maybe it was 10 years ago. It might not matter based on the conversation we're having or what we're writing. We just need the other person to know the action is finished. When we make sentences in the present perfect, though, we do have to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, you're going to use have and then the participle form of the verb. Because eclipse is a regular verb, the participle is the same as the past tense. Now, if our subject is he, she, or it, we're going to use has, H-A-S, and then the participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Caitlin Clark has eclipsed many college basketball records this season. Now, if you're watching this video from outside of the United States, you might be kind of wondering, what is this person talking about? But if you live in the United States and you have a TV on or have had a TV on at any point in the last month, there is a good chance you've heard something about this particular athlete. She has impressed and awed so many people, and she has surpassed many records related to collegiate basketball. Now let's look at making a negative present perfect sentence. To do that, again, we pay attention to our subject. So if our subject is I, you, we, or they, use have not or the contraction haven't, and then the participle. If the subject is he, she, or it, use has not or hasn't, and then the participle. Here's another example. The team hasn't eclipsed 20 points this season. I saw a sentence very similar to this talking about a particular football team, right? And this football team is struggling to score points. So the writer here was noting like they haven't surpassed that. They haven't scored more than that. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, start with have or has, then you're going to have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at my last example. Have any companies eclipsed Apple to become the world's largest? Okay. This might go back to that fourth definition of the verb where we were talking about reaching greater or diminishing someone's prominence or their power, or in this case, their size. Now let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb eclipse. And the first word we're going to discuss is the noun form of this word. The noun has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. When we use the noun eclipse, we can talk about the event where a planet or a moon blocks the sun's light. An example of this: did you view the eclipse on April 8th? Okay. Now there's a second way to use the noun eclipse, and again, that's usually referring to the loss of significance, power, or prominence in relation to another person or thing. An example of this noun in a sentence can be, the story shows us a writer frustrated at the eclipse of his essays by his children's books. Saw a sentence recently as I was doing a little reading about a famous writer who thought of himself as this very serious writer. Wrote a lot for adults. Then, kind of on a whim, wrote some children's books, and those became super popular. And everyone sort of forgot about all of his other writings. And that was very difficult for him. He saw himself as an essayist, not as a children's book author, right? Now we're going to talk about two more related nouns or phrases here. So we're going to keep talking a little bit about planets or moons blocking the sun's light. So many times when you hear the word eclipse, you hear it with another word. You might hear a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. Solar means related to the sun. So a solar eclipse is an eclipse in which the sun is obscured by the moon. I've got a picture. Now these are, I don't think, to scale in size, but I'll kind of bring my highlighter down here so you can kind of look, right? Here's the sun, right? And here's sunlight going towards our planet Earth. But at some point, it can be blocked by the moon, right? This is something that happens, I think, about every 18 months. So an example of this, North America experienced a solar eclipse on April 8th, right? This will be very true, especially if you're watching this video after April 8th. Now, another type of eclipse is a lunar. Lunar means related to moon. So this is where an eclipse where the moon appears darkened as it passes into the Earth's shadow. So again, I've got a diagram here. You can see the sun. Here's our planet Earth, and Earth is getting in the way of blocking the light to the moon. An example of this in a sentence might be, there will be a partial lunar eclipse on September 18th. Right? So this particular type of event will occur and does occur a little more frequently than solar eclipses. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.